Hello there. This is RSAC conference week, so we're doing something a little different. We've got 3 great community interviews for this episode. And community, as a reminder, these interviews are the opposite of the sponsored interviews. These are cases where I've either reached out to folks and asked them to be on the podcast because they have something interesting to talk about, or they've reached out to me. They've put something in our securityweekly.com/guests form and convinced me that they've got something interesting to talk about. The first of these is going to be Helen Patton, my good friend Helen Patton, who you might remember from an interview we did a little while back talking about the Cybersecurity Canon, a sort of book club for cybersecurity books. Well, she's written another book of her own alongside Josiah Dykstra called Switching to Cyber. It's designed to help folks switch to a cyber career from other unrelated fields. Next, we talked to Lenny Zeltzer. He just completed over 6 years as the CISO of Axonius and has a lot of thoughts to share now that he's reflecting on what he's learned in that time, in that role. We pick his brain on what it's like to be in such a visible role for so long. Startup CISOs are often responsible for corporate security, and product marketing and evangelism. He has some interesting thoughts on it and a lot of blog posts, which we include in the show notes as well. And finally, for our third, least but not last interview, Alexandre Sierra, my good friend, joins me. He's the CTO and co-founder of Tenure Security, and they focus on third-party cyber risk management, which is a really interesting space right now. I feel like there's an inflection point at the moment. So this really seemed like the right time to have him on to have this conversation. I've known him for years. I used to work for Tenure. But I think just now we are starting to see things change here in the U.S. with it. So both folks at Gartner and FS-ISAC are loudly calling out the fact that questionnaires and security rating services that use outside-in scanning aren't really getting the job done, putting more pressure on this role, TPCRM that is. Insurance providers are reporting that the largest category of policy claims are due to third-party compromises. So what if first parties just got an inside look into their third parties and the security, the amount of risk, their security programs? It sounds impossible. A lot of people don't believe that it could work, but this is exactly what Tenure does, and it does work in Brazil. So I find it really interesting. I want to see if they can break into the U.S. market, if the U.S. market can kind of get past this, hey, how bad my security is secret, and you don't get to see that. It seems like something we just need to get past and need to break through. It seems like it works pretty well in Brazil, and I'm really interested to see if it works here. And Sierra tells us how they got it to work in Brazil, and you be the judge if you think it's going to work here. I'm very interested to see what happens. All right, first up is Helen. So I will stop talking, let you get to that interview, and I hope you enjoy these interviews as much as we did recording them.
This is a Security Weekly production for security professionals by security professionals. Please visit securityweekly.com/subscribe to subscribe to all the shows on our network.
It's the show where we talk security vendors and aren't afraid to name names. It's Enterprise Security Weekly. Ever feel like your network infrastructure is stuck in the past? Meet Meter, the company reimagining what it means to get and stay online. Meter delivers full-stack networking, wired, wireless, and cellular, all in one seamless, scalable, and secure solution. From hardware design and firmware to software deployment and support, Meter streamlines every part of your network while giving you all the control and transparency you need. Whether you're managing a branch office, retail stores, or a massive data center, Meter gives you performance, reliability, and the visibility you need to stay in control. Thanks to Meter for sponsoring. Go to securityweekly.com/meter to book a demo now. That's securityweekly.com/meter, METER. Zero Trust is clearly the future as threats get faster, quieter, and harder to detect. But implementing it shouldn't disrupt the business. ThreatLocker enforces default deny at execution in a way that remains enterprise-ready, scalable, and operationally clean. Unknown software is stopped cold, trusted apps stay contained, and drift is locked down across the environment. It's zero trust that works in real enterprises and prepares you for the threats ahead. See why CISOs are adopting it at securityweekly.com/threatlocker. Welcome to Enterprise Security Weekly. For this interview, we're chatting with Helen Patton. She's a cybersecurity veteran that has served as a CISO and CISO advisor for much of her career. Helen is a founder and chief of staff at the Cybersecurity Canon, and we'll explain what that is in just a moment. She's the author of Navigating the Cybersecurity Career Path, and her latest book, following up on that one, is Switching to Cyber. Welcome to the show, Helen.
Thanks for having me.
So, Cybersecurity Canon, let's start there with what that is. Can you give us like the quick elevator pitch on that one?
Sure thing. So the Canon, that's Cybersecurity Canon with one N like corpus of work, not two N's like a gun, is meant to be the first source of cybersecurity wisdom for cybersecurity professionals. And to do that, we get together a whole bunch of cybersecurity professionals who read books about cybersecurity and review those books and let other people know whether those books are worth reading as a cybersecurity professional or not. So there is a website, cybercanon.org. And within that website, right now, we've got over 200 reviews. And from that, there are 50 books that have been inducted into the Cybersecurity Canon Hall of Fame, which means we think those books should be read by everybody who's in the industry. So that's what the Canon's all about. We are a nonprofit, and we went into, so the Canon's been around for about 10 years, but we became a nonprofit within the last year. So super excited to see where it's headed.
And if you're going to RSA, there'll be a decent Canon presence there as well, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So we work with the bookstore there, and we get our own bookshelf. So if you want just to go to the bookstore and go straight to the place where there's good stuff, that's the way to do it. And a number of the authors of the books that we've reviewed and our Hall of Fame winners will be there to do book signings and other things. So yeah, RSA is going to be a busy time for all of us.
Awesome. So your first book, Navigating the Cybersecurity Career Path, if I recall from reading it a couple of years ago, it is more for people getting into cybersecurity or that want to get into cybersecurity. Correct me at any moment here.
Yes. So there's actually three parts to it. So the first part is getting into cyber. And in that role, in that section of the book, I did talk about people who, let's call them traditional career path kind of people. So they're high schoolers going into college into the workforce, that kind of path. I do in there talk about non-traditional paths a little bit, but just a little bit. And then the middle part is, okay, you've made it into cyber. How do you survive this job? And then the last bit is, okay, you're now a new leader of a security program in cyber. What are some of the things that you need to deal with? So the first book was meant to be a comprehensive, not just getting in, but sort of staying in and thriving in cyber. That was the first book. Yeah.
And then this one, I think, the first thing people probably need to understand about it is that, well, I feel like you've done a pretty good job with the title here, Switching to Cyber. So for people that are mid-career and they're they're hoping maybe the pasture's greener over in Cyberland,
right?
They want to come from somewhere else,
right?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So my co-author Josiah Dykstra and I wanted to write this book because there's a lot of people who are the traditional people trying to get into cyber. Let's just call them entry level, although that's a whole different soapbox moment.
That is a different discussion.
Right. But what we're seeing is actually the need in the industry is for people with somewhere between 5 to 10 years of business experience and cyber experience, but that there are also a lot of people who have that experience in some other career who are trying to get into cyber as well. So the switching to cyber is really written for the person who's already been working for 5, 10 years or more, who's trying to work out how do they transition into a cyber role without having to go right back to the beginning and right back to an entry-level job and an entry-level pay and all of the things? And how do they position themselves and network appropriately so that they can move into a role as laterally, at least, as possible? And what's different about trying to get into cyber if you're that kind of person? So that's really the focus of this book.
And I find it fascinating because I just finished reading a book called Range by David Epstein. And the premise of that book is that generalists tend to thrive and tend to be what a lot of industries need, particularly around complex systems, solving problems in complex systems, rather than specialists. And it's after reading that book, the whole premise of your book, makes a lot of sense that actually in cybersecurity, we need folks with varied backgrounds, with fundamental knowledge in completely different areas, and they bring a lot to the table, particularly in areas where we've been struggling maybe for decades, and we haven't found a good solution. And the book gives example after example after example of people, even late in their career, making a switch and making a huge impact because they had a completely different perspective on the problems. And Jackie would know a lot about this.
Yeah, no, I didn't even know what a SIM was when I was hired to write detections for one. And I think had I come into the SIM knowing what syslog was, knowing what sysmon was, having preconceived notions about what should be in these logs, what the different resources were and meant, I wouldn't have been as successful. Because pretty quickly in my career writing detections, I wrote one that found compromises on a bunch of copier printers. And that's not generally something that people are looking at as a source of threat, and people don't have EDR for copy printers. But if you're just looking at kind of like an LLM, if you're just looking at data points and not having preconceived notions about what those data points are or what they should mean, sometimes you can do better work. So yeah, I think and when I talk to women about joining cybersecurity, that's usually one of their big hesitations is like, well, I don't know anything about cybersecurity. And I'm like, well, that's actually a strength because you'll bring fresh perspective. And I think it's the cybersecurity background you bring with you that is often one of the differentiators between yourself and somebody that's done this for a long time. Not that there's not benefits to having, historical context and things like that. But yeah, I think, every once in a while, I think there's that anecdote about the little girl who, they're trying to do a monumental task. And she says, well, why don't you just turn it sideways? And, people have not thought of that. So yeah, I think there's always benefit to fresh eyes on an old problem.
Yeah. So, Helen, maybe let's talk a little bit about diving into the books or the book. I'm sure you use some examples here. What are some of the fields outside cyber, that would be attractive for maybe a hiring manager in cyber? Like what do some of those backgrounds look like?
So the most obvious ones are ones that we started with too. Josiah came out of a military background and a U.S. government background. So if you think about things like anybody coming out of the military, police force, emergency response, any kind of other profession where there is some element of your job that is defensive or running towards the fire or protective in nature, tends to be where we start when we think about other sympathetic jobs to the cyber space. But the cyber field is super big. So there's a whole bunch of, I would call them cyber adjacent fields that are really easy to slide into cyber from. Project management, compliance, other kinds of risk management, fraud, for example, in the financial sector. Those kinds of roles where the day-to-day of the work is going to be the same, even if the focus is now cyber as opposed to something else, can be one of those areas that makes it really easy to move over. I think the other area, which is a little less intuitive, is where the kinds of thinking are similar. So I've employed people before that have a really deep music background. And actually, if you go, I'm looking at some backgrounds right now. If you go to the average security team, you're going to find somebody in there who plays piano, plays guitar. The way a musician's brain works is very in tune to how a cybersecurity professional who wants to do threat detection or threat response or that kind of thing, it's really sympathetic. So I think there are some really obvious jobs to come from, but there are some less obvious ones that are super successful as well.
Yeah, I worked on a resource for WESIS, Women in Cybersecurity, and I took the top 6 most commonly women-dominated jobs that women burn out of and kind of correlated those skills. And some of the other ones were like nursing. Nursing is a really good example, because if you can triage a code blue and stay level-headed and follow policies and procedures and understand 800 different acronyms, that it's a very adaptable set that you're basically just swapping out the basis of information, but it's kind of all the same thing.
Right.
Human resources was another one that we found was really, really, and social work, believe it or not, was another one that had a lot of skills associated with it that we found were pretty good parallels to things you have to do in security. So a lot of times security is a people problem.
Absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely. Sean?
I switched over from IT to cyber, and that was a natural flow for me, because all the terms on the network and how systems work really applied pretty well, and I just had to learn some of the lingo. Do you find that with the book you're able to help break down almost like the cyber lingo and help make that easier and more relatable?
We do. Well, we try to. Okay. So one of the things that if you're in cyber for any length of time, I think you come to know is that how cyber is done and the language that's used is really specific to the company or the organization that you're working in. Cyber for government is different than cyber for private sector. Cyber for retail is different than cyber for healthcare. There is some overlap for sure. And so in the book, we tried to deal with the most common linguistic thing. So Josiah was one of the authors of Cybersecurity Myths and Misconceptions, which goes a lot into this sort of, how do we misuse language in cyber, and how do people who aren't cyber think they understand cyber because we're using words they know, but they're not understanding the context we're using the words in. So we go into it a little bit, but I do recognize that we would not be finished writing the book if we were going to be comprehensive with that. It is very specific to the organization. Unfortunately, it's one of the things I like about the industry, but it's also one of the things that makes it hard. The benefit to somebody, if we take nursing, for example, I think they can very easily in the healthcare sector go from nursing into cyber. Or if you are, I don't know, if you're a teacher, it's easier, I think, to go from being a teacher to cyber if you do that in the higher ed or the K through 12 ecosystem, because you understand a lot of that industry specific or organizational specific language. And so the leap to go from non-cyber to cyber is a little bit smaller if you stay within the same industry that you're already really familiar with. And we talk about that too.
I think for nursing, I went to Cactus Con a couple weeks ago. It's a cyber conference in Arizona. And one of the great talks I listened to was about ransomware in hospitals. So if you think about really understanding the systems that are used in hospitals and how to prioritize which systems need to get back online the fastest and which are going to make the largest impact, I would love to have somebody who's actually worked in an emergency room on my team to do that incident response and help with that, because what I intuitively as a security expert might think is the most important thing might not be. A nurse may say, no, actually those medicine cabinets, those are the most important things. I was looking at one yesterday when I was in the hospital and I was like, man, if that thing goes down, and the nurse actually came in and she was like, well, I was going to give her this, but it just froze. So I can't get it open. So you're going to have to give it to her in the operating room because I literally can't get the drawers to open to get to the medicine. So I could see where it would be really helpful having somebody on staff who can say, actually, like, these kiosks are the most critical thing, and like other things can probably wait.
Yeah. When I started in cyber, I went from IT into cyber as well back in the day. But I went from IT to business continuity, disaster recovery planning, and then into cyber. And I find it really ironic now we talk about cyber resilience. You know, we're not talking about cyber as a absolute way of being able to protect against threats so much as cyber as a way to minimize damage. And I feel like my whole career's gone full circle back to business continuity, disaster recovery planning again. And in that function, you are so close to the business. I remember doing a tabletop exercise with a customer, an internal organization I was part of before, where we said to the business, what do you need? And they said, well, we need the help desk. I'm like, why do you need the help desk? And they said, because that's who we call when we have a problem. And so for them, they couldn't separate the help desk from the underlying technologies that they just didn't think in those terms. And so here we are doing cyber again and ransomware and things that have operational impact. And God help us, the impact of the security of AI and what AI is going to do to the trust mechanisms of our organizations. If we don't understand what the business cares about, we can't do our jobs, really. So I think that mid-career professional becomes even more important now than before, given that we're talking about cyber resilience as a necessity these days.
Yeah, I took a similar path to you, Helen, and often the first thing I would be looking for in a new organization is a recent business impact analysis, right? It's the easiest way to understand what the business cares about. And in cybersecurity, because we cover more and more each year, we need the ability to prioritize and to focus on the things that are important. And without that lens, you know, it's just easy to go down any old rabbit hole and maybe not be helping. And in fact, I think that's one of my biggest concerns about cybersecurity is that we don't really know the impact of what we do in a lot of cases, right? And maybe it's more obvious to people coming from the outside, coming from other fields, where it's impossible to not know the impact, right? You know, if you have a patient on the table, it becomes very obvious. But you know, if you were to just stop managing the WAF, like,
who cares?
You know, does anybody notice the bad things immediately start happening or never? You know, like it can be really hard to tell. But you know, one of my favorite stories, crossing disciplines, finding benefits from crossing disciplines with all this talk of healthcare, was I think it was a UK hospital bringing in a Formula One pit stop crew to help them understand how to make their processes more efficient. You know, because with an F1 pit crew, I think it's 23 people changing all 4 tires in less than 2 seconds. And to be able to do that, there's like a backup person for every job. You know, there's somebody to watch like the big picture and tell the driver when to hit the gas. And obviously, if they do that wrong and the tire is not on, you know, bad things happen. But apparently, that was super successful. You know, and they were able to help like emergency surgery really improve their processes, even though there's you know the actual underlying thing that each group of people is doing is entirely different. It's all about process optimization in that case. So I wonder, is that something that you touch on in the book? Like, I worry about grabbing excellent talent and then just immediately wasting it by assigning them to something that doesn't really use their talents, especially when they're coming from another field or something like that.
Yeah. Do we talk about process directly? Not necessarily. So the challenge, of course, for us in writing the book is that you have to take the guidance we're giving people is how to move from where they are to what is currently happening in cyber. Now, of course, we're talking about some market disruptions that are happening in the cyber industry right now, and how to think about those as people apply for jobs and that kind of thing. But one of the barriers to getting the most out of a mid-career professional who switches into cyber is the creativity of the managers who are going to be managing those resources. So there is a section in the book for managers, how to look for talent, how to interview that talent, because it's different than if it's a brand new sort of just out of college person, and how to think about training and optimizing the person when they come in, so that you take advantage of their previous experience while you're training them up on the cyber experience. So we do go into that. But, whether or not that person comes from some other career into cyber and immediately goes into some kind of sort of systems level view of cyber, which is where most of our OG cyber people reside, is a slightly different question, and it will depend on the kind of, the size of the security team, the type of organization, whether they're a startup or an established organization, that kind of thing. So we didn't get completely specific, but we touched on it. And one of the things we also try and do in the book is to be able to say to the people reading the book, understand the industry you're in and whether or not you want to stay in that industry, for sure. Understand the kind of work you like to do on a day-to-day basis. And that might tell you the kind of cyber role that would be a good fit for you if you move into cyber. Some people really like that, being in a dark room and doing tech stuff. And some people like talking to people. And so your day-to-day is going to be different. But then the other piece was to take a page out of Daniel Messler's online writings and say, what is the cyber problem that you want to solve when you come into cyber? So what's your purpose for coming into cyber in the first place? It's okay if you're coming into cyber just because you want money. That's perfectly fine. There are kinds of cyber jobs that earn you money. You can shoot for that. But more often than not, the people coming into cyber are coming in because there is some specific problem that they'd like to address, whether it's crappy UX design in the way that people log in, and so they go into an identity field, or maybe they've themselves been on the receiving end of a cyber event and they don't want that to happen to anybody else, or whatever the situation is. So what kind of job, what kind of company do you want to work for, and what kind of industry? What kind of day-to-day work do you want to do? And then what kind of problems do you want to solve? And if you can triangulate that, then you've got an opportunity then to be able to be more specific about the kinds of jobs you look for and the kinds of networking you do with people to find those jobs. So that's sort of the approach we took in the book.
I think you hit the nail on the head with that, of specifically saying, how do you solve the problems that are there? Because ultimately a manager doesn't necessarily want to hire a person. They want to hire someone who can solve problems in specific areas. And so I think that identifying ways that your unique talents and skills and experience can help benefit the organization in solving their problems, kind of to Jackie's point about turning something sideways and that no one had thought about before. I think that's a great approach to solving those problems, is coming from it at different angles.
Yeah, that's sort of where what we were trying to get at with this book is to help people understand how to take something that isn't obviously cyber and rethink it in a cyber context so that they can make that switch. That's the plan.
And, I wonder, if this is something that you tackle as well, but, I think we've, when we prepared for this week, we talked about the concern that, this new perspective that comes in, doesn't necessarily last forever. You're in danger of being told, no, that's not the way we do it. This is the way we do it. Right. And maybe squandering that opportunity of having that fresh face and that mind that's not polluted by the ideas of the way we've always done things. Do you find that's often a problem in organizations, or are organizations pretty aware of the fact that they need that fresh set of eyes and try and protect that when that new person comes in and encourage them to think differently, think outside the box?
I think there are two factors that play into how flexible an organization can be in taking in new feedback and reacting and adjusting to that feedback. One is how compliance driven the cybersecurity program is. What I find in talking to a bunch of cyber leaders is if they are the kind of person that thinks they've only got enough budget to do what must be done, and that cyber frameworks or cyber regulations are very prescriptive about what needs to be done, then bringing in somebody new that goes, have you thought about doing it this other way, tends to fall on deaf ears, because they're like, it's the rule and you can't change it. So there's that. The other is where an organization's really big and you've got a bit of an administrative bureaucracy that goes along with big organizations anyway. Having somebody come in with a fresh set of eyes could be really useful, but whether that feedback can be taken on board and changes made depends a little bit on how creative the leadership of that particular group is, in that they're not just changing their own team, they're changing this really large organization that's got a lot of sort of cultural inertia that goes along with it. So some people work in big organizations and they're really good at being creative and getting new things done. But often you go into a very big organization and people are like, yeah, we do it this way because we have to do it this way or the rest of the organization can't work with this. So it really depends on the organization. So again, I think as a hiring manager, learning how to take advantage of a fresh set of eyes is really, really important. But as the job seeker who is looking to come from another organization, keeping those things in mind can help you decide whether an organization is the right place for you to land if you want them to be able to take your feedback. Sometimes new employees into a cyber career, just want to be told what to do because they don't have the confidence for anything else yet. Sometimes.
Right.
Yeah. I will tell you, as a hiring manager, I loved having new people, and I took advantage of a lot of reverse mentoring of new people coming in, where I could just say to them, what made you like blink when somebody said something this week because they said something that you thought that just didn't make sense to you? Because those are the places where we're making assumptions about how things should work, that somebody who's new to the team doesn't think the same way. There's your opportunity to do something creative.
And as we wrap up the conversation here, I actually, just before we started recording this, I was chatting with a regular listener who is interviewing for jobs right now. He's not making a switch to a different industry. He's been in cyber for a long time. But he had an interview with an AI agent, and he was sharing some screenshots of what that experience was like. Do you make a resume? Like what do you recommend people do? Like how do you, getting a new job within your own field is stressful enough. Switching to a new field, what should that look like? What's the ideal path that takes now?
I still think you need a resume, because beyond the, AI fighting AI over a job board and job position, all of those kinds of things sort of makes resumes less useful. But behind that interface, there are still hiring managers who are going to want to see your resume. They're used to seeing it in a resume format, all of those things. So resume is still important. I would say use AI to tailor your resume to the job you're trying to get, because you should do that, because generic resumes are no good to anybody. But I think the more important piece these days, if you're looking to get a cyber job, whether you're already in cyber or you're coming in from somewhere else, your ability to network with people who are in the industries and in the fields where you're interested in going is going to be more impactful and more useful to your job search than how good your resume is. So, the learning to be able to effectively and efficiently network is a superpower right now. And I think people should be doubling down on that regardless of who they are or how long they've been in cyber for.
Yeah. I can't argue with that. I don't think I've ever landed a job with just a resume. It's always been somebody I knew.
That's right. That's right. AI is not going away, and AI is going to make things a little more challenging for the job seeker right now. But I do think that for the mid-career switcher, you've already got a company that you're working in. You've already got contacts within that company. One of the things I would suggest to people is go make friends with the security people who work in the company you're already a part of. And those people will have a network, and you can help ask those people to make introductions to a broader network for you. So the mid-career professionals in some ways have a leg up on networking in ways that entry-level people don't. And they should take advantage of that.
And I have seen people do that switch over within the same company, changing what they're doing, switching from either IT into cyber or another area within that company into cyber, and performing those roles. So that definitely does work.
All right, excellent stuff. I'm looking forward to getting a chance to check out the book, Helen, and I presume it will be there at the bookstore at RSA.
Yep, and I'll be doing a book signing sometime RSA week.
Awesome. I'm sure we'll have more details on that later. But looking forward to seeing you there. Looking forward to checking out the book. And thanks for joining us today on Enterprise Security Weekly.
Thanks for having me.
Right now with Tenure, IT and security teams complete patching programs in minutes, not weeks. Reduce software vulnerabilities by up to 97%. Cut incident response times by up to 99%. This is not just IT, this is autonomous IT, making business, your business, unstoppable. Tenure, autonomous IT, unstoppable business. See more at securityweekly.com/Tenure. In today's threat landscape, cyber attacks move fast, and security gaps, siloed tools, and slow response can turn small incidents into major breaches. That's why organizations need a proactive, unified defense from a single, trusted partner. SentinelOne Wayfinder Threat Detection and Response delivers proactive, scalable defense built for modern threats, unifying expert-led readiness, threat hunting, incident response, and 24/7 managed detection and response. Harnessing Google Threat Intelligence, industry-leading AI technology, and unmatched expertise, Wayfinder helps teams see attacks sooner, respond faster, and reduce risk across the entire attack lifecycle. Ready to stop attacks and accelerate response? Learn more at securityweekly.com/SentinelOne. Wayfinder, where threat intelligence, AI, and human expertise deliver true cyber resilience. Welcome to Enterprise Security Weekly. For this interview, we're chatting with Lenny Zeltzer. This is one of 3 interviews that we're going to put out around RSA time. Since we're all going to be at RSA, we're not going to be able to record then. I believe we also have Helen that we're recording about her new book release, Helen Patton, and we also have Alexandre Sierra, who we're going to be in real time talking to later today. But I'm not sure exactly how you're going to see it, but in some of these interviews, I'm going to look like a lobster, and in some of these interviews, I will look like I haven't been left out in the sun for days, like I didn't wash up on a beach. All right, getting into it, Lenny is a cybersecurity veteran who has worked in many roles over his long career, most recently as the CISO of Axonius. Has one of the, I think, there's a lot of personal websites out there in cybersecurity land. And Lenny, I think you have one of the most useful and most generous out there.
Well, thank you very much.
Welcome to the show.
Yeah, it's great to be here.
I'm going to second that on your website. I've used it in resources there a number of times over the years.
Yeah. For certain terms, you have some serious SEO with Zeltzer.com.
I think it's just because I've been around for a while, first of all. Second of all, I write as a form of therapy, and also to make sure that I capture what I know before I forget it. So mostly these are notes to myself, and I'm glad that other people are finding them useful.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's something I have at some point in my career learned, like, stop worrying about perfecting everything before I publish it, and just like if I found it useful, somebody else is going to find it useful too, right? So, as I mentioned, you've had a lot of different roles over the years. I believe before I took a product position, I remember talking to you about that role, and I think you were fairly newly in this Axonius position. That might have been around 2021, maybe. So maybe not you new, but already in that position for a couple of years. And certainly, I think one of the main things we want to talk about is what you learned in this role. We don't see a lot of CISOs in a role for 6 years. The kind of joke is, or we see people in there very long or very briefly, right? And in some cases we're not even seeing the role, like rehiring for the role in some cases. Some organizations decide, maybe we don't need one, or we go out and get a fractional CISO or something like that. But did you expect to be in that role for that long?
It's hard to look into the future, and I've never been a great predictor of what awaits me or even the industry more than just a handful of years ahead. So I make my decisions based on what I enjoy doing now and what I think I'll enjoy doing a couple of years from now. And hey, if things work out, then great. I'm at the company for longer than perhaps some people, and that gives me a chance to make a bigger difference. Oftentimes, when we go through the interviewing process, we often hear an interview question like, so how do you see your first few months? And when do you think you will really be able to operate in your role in your full capacity? And we try to answer in a way that, of course, makes us look like we're going to be effective day one or maybe month one. But in reality, it takes time to really understand the organization, the position, form the relationships. And so it's amazing when any of us are able to stay in the same role for more than just a year or two.
Yeah, particularly, I think it's a complex position when you're a CISO at a vendor, because you're juggling many roles there. In most cases that I see, you're worrying about product security, corporate security, securing the employees and the company's data, but also some kind of evangelism role. Something, maybe you're getting pulled on sales calls to help close deals or to assure customers, that the product that they're buying is securely built. How did you, is that typically something you find other vendor CISOs find challenging, or did you find it challenging? I've always been curious about that, because the CISO role is expansive enough already without throwing product security and then the evangelism, the kind of public facing piece of it as well. For a while, you showed up in like full video advertisements. Whatever website I went to, you were in ads for a while.
Hold on a second. Those were not advertisements, at least the way I was speaking. It was deep thought leadership that happened perhaps be used in such a capacity. But, certainly there's something special about building and leading a security program for a security vendor. And this is the reason why I joined Axonius in the first place. I remember, about 12 years ago, I was still doing consulting, and I thought, it's so amazing that I'm on a different career path. I thought I would be doing consulting for much longer. And I thought, those poor CISOs, they have all of the responsibility and none of the power to make things happen. And I'm so glad that I'm not one of those. And then eventually, many years later, when I had the opportunity to become a CISO, it was because I was joining an organization that was building a security product that made me think that, yes, even though the security organization is a cost center, my expertise will help influence the product direction. And whenever you have a security leader and a security team working for a security company, they probably also use the product. They're probably on the cutting edge of those product's capabilities and are able to more directly influence the future of the company than if you're doing security purely internally at a more traditional organization. That's the upside of doing security work in any capacity for a security vendor.
Yeah, certainly product role, on the vendor side at least, that was my favorite role, hands down, being able to influence a product. Like I always had a very clear vision of what the product should look like, what it should do, how it should work. So did you find yourself flexing that somewhat there as well? I mean, you were in product prior to this, right?
Yeah, indeed. Yeah. Before I became a CISO, I switched out of consulting and I started building security products and services. And it's because every, 8 years or so, I get bored of doing one thing and end up switching to something else. And I love the fact that I have had a chance to do consulting, product management, and then security leadership. And I still love building stuff. I love building security products. But here I had a chance to build a security program. But still, as I said, even when you're building a security program, especially as part of a young organization, if the company that you work for is in IT or in security, you have that opportunity to provide feedback and influence the product roadmap. And that is just highly, highly gratifying. I loved that part of being in product management. I mean, there you are directly responsible for the business. Here, as a security leader, it was an indirect opportunity to influence the direction, and that was still very, very rewarding.
Yeah, at some point in my career, I decided I needed to be at least a little bit good at everything. And I would take roles that I knew I wasn't well suited for. And this talk of getting bored, right, is something I want to jump into here and discuss. Because, at some point after beating myself up for a couple of years, I was like, well, what if I just leaned into what I was good at? Right. Instead of like intentionally, trying to smooth out all the bumps in my skill set, and fill all the gaps. So, certainly for me, this kind of security program I like to jump into needed to be chaotic. I'm the kind of ADHD, that will take an entire bookshelf and organize it. Right. I love coming into chaos and taking all that and organizing it. I love coming into a kitchen, pulling all the utensils out of the drawers and rearranging everything so that when I'm cooking, I don't even need to think about where a ladle is or a potato masher or something like that. I can just reach without looking and grab it.
Yeah, I think it's very important for a security leader to understand where is our strength and what do we enjoy doing. And you love the chaos. You come in, you bring order to that chaos. That's very satisfying for you. And when you do something that you love, of course, you're going to not only enjoy it, but also be really good at it. From my perspective, when it comes to security leadership, we can really think about our, let's say, classic CISO archetypes as being either builders. Those are security leaders who love coming into a clean slate. There's nothing there, and you just build from scratch the way that you want it, the way that you've always wanted to have a security program. Yeah. And because there is no legacy, so to speak, you get to build it what you think in the way that you think is right. That's a builder. And when I joined Axonius, the company was very, very young, and that was highly satisfying being in charge of that effort. Now, other people, perhaps more like you, I think of them as fixers. You want the mess, and that's how you get energized, and it feels amazingly rewarding to say, like, look at what I did. It used to be this chaos, and now it is chaos no more. That's a fixer in my mind. That's a fixer, a person who embraces chaos and brings order to it. And then there's a third type of a security leader who is, in my mind, a scale operator. This is where you already have a program that is mostly functional. No program is perfect. There's always something to fine-tune, to bring the costs down, to increase the metrics, to make it that machine that is self-perpetuating scale operator. And those of us who have been in the role of a CISO for more than, let's say, a couple of years, perhaps have experienced all of those personas. But it's not for everybody. I enjoyed first being a builder, then a fixer, and then I'm getting to the point of being an optimizer, a skill operator. But I think some of us might say, you know what, I built the thing. 2 years have passed. I'm getting a little bit bored. It's time for me to leave. And what's important, I think, is to understand who are you? Where do you derive the most joy from your work? And then if you decide that you want to keep going, that needs to be a deliberate decision to stay and to focus on the next stage of the security program rather than sticking around, out of habit. That usually leads to unfortunate results.
It's going to start looking like quiet quitting, right? Like you lose interest, you get bored, and maybe you should just move on to another thing. But maybe you don't recognize that fact. Maybe you're still in that stage that I was in, where I was like, oh, I've got to be good. I've got to be every single kind of security person.
Yeah, and it's hard. You're right. It's hard to recognize when you get to a certain stage. It's hard to recognize when everything becomes too familiar and perhaps you're getting a little bit complacent. And sometimes maybe that's the right thing to do, as hard as it is to admit. Maybe you've got a newborn child at home and you can appreciate being able to spend a little bit more time with your family while the job still continues, and you cannot be negligent or not fulfill your responsibility to the org, but maybe you ride your success for a little bit longer. But again, that is a very dangerous state to enter, because then you can become complacent. Complacency leads to mediocrity, and none of us probably want to feel that way.
So I'm kind of curious. You mentioned the three types of security leaders, and coming in at Axonius is when it was young, you're building. But I imagine you went through what was many of those through those phases as the program was built, as you ran into problems, fixed them, stuff like that. What was that like, having to transition from, okay, I'm starting from nothing, now we're moving along this progression?
I think the biggest challenge of recognizing that there are different stages and different security leaders is that these are not discrete stages. It's not like you get to the point where you say, aha, 2 years have passed, I have built it. Let's move on to, I don't know, fixing it or cleaning it up. Well, it's a gradual transition. It's a gradual progression. It's a continuity. And so for me, going through this continuity has been a little bit surreal, because blink and 6 years have passed. What? Right. That's amazing. And what I realized is that I need to force myself to periodically just pause and reflect. Like, hey, what have we done in the past year? And a lot of security leaders do that naturally, because our boards or our peers require an annual kind of a report. Hey, what have we done in the past year? What's our plan for next year? And that's a perfect opportunity to ask yourself, so given the work that the team did in the past year, at which stage are we? And what are our priorities for next year? And will that get us closer to the next stage? And then start asking yourself, am I at the right, am I at the right place? And do I get excited about the work that we did in the past year and what's coming up next? For me, all of those stages have been rewarding and exciting in different ways.
Yeah, I imagine one of the ways that you can track the passage of time is starting out. I imagine you were a team of one, right? And then you got to hire some people. And then maybe you even get to a point where you recognize someone as an ideal replacement for yourself, maybe. So is that something that, maybe you recognize the passage of time as you build out a team?
Certainly, yeah. One way to measure progress is by the number of people that report to you, but that is very, very dangerous, because that creates incentives to want to just hire more people and try to accumulate power through this kind of hierarchy. And that's usually not the right approach, especially nowadays, when augmented by AI agents, smaller teams can be even more powerful than larger teams could be in the past. So I would caution people against measuring time based on the number of people that report to you. That's especially the case for security organizations, where the CISO might have at least indirect responsibilities, not necessarily control over people in other groups, but certainly kind of dotted line relationships. And as an organization grows, those dotted and direct reporting lines typically increase. But I would just say, measure passage of time. Well, for me, it's always been looking at how much grayer my hair is, although that is also, for me, has been a continuity, but also measuring the passage of time based on the state of the security program. And initially, when you're building from scratch, we talked about how that can be exciting, the clean slate, you can do anything you want. There, the focus is, what controls should I build first? Should I, let's say, roll out a centrally controlled EDR agent, because in a small company that might not be in place? Should I put in place a single sign-on, because that'll improve security, but also make it easier for employees to access their apps, and they're happier and you're happier. So those initial decisions, dare I say it, are almost easy. When you have no controls, you think, what controls should you build? But then at some point after your work, you look at your control catalog. Maybe you're looking at the CS critical controls or NIST CSF or ISO 27002. You're like, wait, I think I can put a checkbox next to each of those. What do I do now? That's one indicator that you're exiting the build phase, and you're now, in some cases, maybe are entering the fix state, because by building, the business around you changes as well. So periodically you need to assess, did I build to the wrong spec? Are my requirements a little bit different? Should I tune and fix something? And then you're starting to think, fine, each of these controls are in place. How do I mature them? Maybe I have, single sign-on and two-factor authentication enforced. Maybe to make this work better, now I need to be able to validate whether the authentication occurs from an endpoint controlled by the company. Initially, maybe you didn't put it in place. Now you're not putting in necessarily a new control, but you're maturing existing controls. And that's when you're entering the stage of kind of optimizing.
So did you have a moment, you mentioned AI agents, where you kind of looked at your whole program and reevaluated everything from that point of view? Every now and then we do have, these technological changes that kind of force you to go back and think, and the technological change could be adversaries and how like the entrance of ransomware required a lot of people to redo their programs, right?
Yeah.
Or it could be, just technology in general, like with generative AI. Do you see other CISOs do that? Did you kind of go back to your program and go across the whole thing and say, what can we now do here that's different from before?
For me, Adrian, that was less about how do I do a program differently and more about my mindset as the CISO. And it was indeed AI that made me change how I view my role. And our title is Chief Security Officer or Chief Information Security Officer. We're thinking typically about how to tighten the controls in the organization so that bad things happen. But that's a very challenging mindset when your business is pushing you to support the deployment of AI, especially when you're talking about AI agents, which means that automated tools can now take actions that employees sometimes don't directly control. And that's a very scary thing. And if we think classically, how do I rein in that chaos? How do I restrict it? That can be very dangerous, because the business truly needs more AI to succeed. And you're just being a blocker. You're saying, hold on, slow down, not so fast. Nobody wants to hear that. So what did I learn? Perhaps I need to reframe how I think about the role. And instead of thinking of myself as being a chief information security officer, can I instead be called chief insecurity officer? And by that I mean, can I focus on exactly how much insecurity can the organization tolerate? And how can I build in some dampeners, some shock absorbers, so that the business can move as quickly as possible, can do the AI experiments and use AI agents. And can I, if I manage the IT and security program, make it easier for organizations to do things that normally I would object to. Again, it's the same role, but the reframing for me made a difference. I want to build and refine a security program that creates shock absorbers so that the organization can bring in more insecurity to operate quickly and efficiently than it could have done without my involvement.
Yeah, it makes sense. Yeah, it's I think the common analogy I tend to reach for is race cars, right? Like if you look at the application of brake and throttle, it's usually 100% of one or another, and not a whole lot of in between. But those brakes are really, really important, right? If you're really gonna push that throttle, if you're gonna put a ton of power in a car, you have to be able to stop it. And retard that motion as just as quickly.
Well, there's certainly a lot of analogies we can use with cars and security, but I'm specifically turning away from the analogy that you just used, which is security is brakes in the car. In order to drive fast, you need to be able to control your speed. There's room for talking about brakes and security, but I'm saying, in a way, actually just the opposite. We have traditionally thought about us being brakes, and conceptually people realize that to go fast, you need to be able to slow down some time, but nobody likes that. Instead, I'm thinking more, and I purposely use the word shock absorbers. Can I allow that car to go on pavement that's imperfect? Or can I add stronger bumpers? So that when, I don't want to overdo the analogy, I don't know how many collisions, bumpers on a racetrack control, but like in the real world, when you've got cars on the street, I live in New York City. The roads have a lot of potholes. You need good shock absorbers. And because of all the traffic here, people do end up bumping each other. You need bumpers. So the car can go fast, can operate in adversarial conditions of a New York City street. I've got the shock absorbers and the bumpers. That's how I now prefer to think of my role.
I think New York City is probably the perfect addition to that metaphor. I've been in a New York City taxi many, many times. And what I have to keep telling myself is if they crashed all the time, it wouldn't work. Like I'm okay.
That's right. And sometimes in slow traffic, you don't even need the brakes, I suppose. Well, not really.
Right.
You still need the brakes. Anyway, we can overdo all the analogies, but the framing is important. Perhaps at different stages in the company's life cycle.
I've even seen, particularly around the AI side of things, where it's not only providing the ability to absorb some of the hits or the bumps that you're encountering on the way, but kind of guides some of what's happening here. Like, hey, here's the path we can go down to get what you want, but kind of keep us on a better road than we could be on, and really trying to provide some of the benefit that these tools provide, rather than just say, whoa, we got to stop.
Yeah, I mean, to me, a perfect analogy, though it's perhaps commonly known already, is infrastructure as code. With infrastructure of code, I'm talking about tooling like Terraform. You can provide your DevOps or SRE or developer personnel with templates that allow them to deploy fast, much faster than they could if they had to click manually with a console. But those templates and the guardrails you can build around templates allow them to not only deploy fast, but also deploy with security guardrails being automatically enforced. And that, to me, is a perfect example of how a secure approach to doing something can actually provide a more meaningful business benefit, because businesses want to go fast.
Yeah, I suppose it's it would be ideal for the security leader to be able to put on that different hat, to see the perspective of the business, where the business wants to go, where they want to be, and kind of think in those two different roles, right? Once you understand like what they're trying to do, what they're trying to achieve, maybe it's a bit easier, instead of just thinking about all the controls you can put in place, also thinking about where maybe you, even though you could put a control in, you don't, right? Or it's just monitoring. Yes. It's not the full extra friction thing that you could do, right?
And that is a very, very hard thing for a security person to say. We could deploy this control, but I think actually a preventative version of it is the wrong approach. Let's do something around detection or do something else. That's very hard. And you're right, Adrian. The only way in which we can arrive at such decisions is by understanding the business. And what does that mean, understanding the business? I mean, it just means taking the time to read the program, the company's business plan, the product roadmap, attending meetings with sales personnel where they discuss what's going well and where they're seeing friction, and really understanding what is working for the business, what is not, where is it heading next quarter, next year, next 3 years. And if you don't know that's fine. It just means that you need to put effort into answering those questions. Sometimes I had the privilege of being a member of the executive leadership team, and so I was naturally exposed to those discussions, and that made my job a lot easier. But in a different organization, a CISO might not be a part of those conversations, but they can still ask questions of their colleagues or get themselves invited to certain meetings so that they can just listen in. And, the first time I understood the importance of this was many years ago when I noticed that HR personnel or people partners, sometimes are called, are participating in day-to-day business discussions. And initially I thought, why is the HR person here? Are they there to make sure we don't say something we're not supposed to? No. They're there because to support people, they need to understand the context within which they operate. They need to be familiar with the business. And I think we should have a similar perspective.
So how much, you mentioned relationships with people earlier on, in the beginning, coming into the organization, about building relationships and whatnot. How, I imagine this is, in your role as a CISO, going from scratch to building out this program, how did you go about building those relationships with the other executive team? If you're in the meetings with them and stuff like that, building the rapport so that they, understand that you're on board, but also trying to watch out for the company and help.
People want to work with people who are supportive and empathetic. And so that is why what we just talked about is so important. Understand the business priorities, and understand the responsibilities and the metrics that other people are being measured by. If they're being measured by how many releases they have each quarter, if they're measured by quota attainment, understand that and think how you can help them. And if other people understand that you understand their world and you're there to support them, yes, you've got your own responsibilities, which is to think about risk, of course, but you're there to support them. You understand what's important to them. And your perspective is not how do I lock things down as tightly as I can, but rather, how do I allow other people to succeed with their objectives in a way that also is responsible and takes risk into account? They're just much more likely to want to collaborate with you. But that's just a starting point that allows you perhaps to be invited or not get kicked out of certain rooms. But then you actually need to see it through. You need to actually show that by providing input, you're not just slowing them down, but you're allowing them to move faster, but with lower risk. And that takes some time. So when you're new to the role, you think about early wins, but recognize that certain projects take time, and building trust with colleagues takes time. And that is perhaps the biggest advantage of being at the organization for more than just a couple of years. It's having that history of building trust that allows you then to influence others, to make sure that actions taken, to make sure that you're invited into conversations in a way that initially you wouldn't be able to do.
Yeah, that almost sounds like how I think about sales, Lenny, like talking about building these relationships. Like I'm often thinking about how can we structure this sales presentation so that we get to that, what I think of as a light bulb moment, where the customer's like, they understand my problems.
Yes.
Like they get what I need. But internally with other people, what can I say to this other person for them to realize I'm not just there to further my own goals, but I understand what they need, what they want.
Yeah. And it begins with empathy, and that is thinking about the world from another person's perspective, and then just asking questions. And you know what? People will probably really appreciate it when you ask them about their world rather than come into their meeting and start talking to them about your world.
Yeah. Well put. So Lenny, what's next? Before we wrap up here, I'm curious, maybe you're not ready to say, maybe you're taking a break. I don't know, but I'd be curious to hear about what you're thinking about next.
Right now, I'm operating in this luxurious moment where I'm able to take some time to work on my own independent projects and explore and experiment while I leave myself open to serendipity and meeting the right people and making the right connections. So my future role will either be leading a security program at a company, or perhaps leading a product team and building something. I don't know. It's amazing to have the flexibility of pursuing both. But before I get there, I have a backlog of ideas for projects and articles to write. I've been really quite active on my blog lately because I have that opportunity to dedicate time to thinking and researching. And also, one of the things that I've been doing for many years involves malware analysis, and I teach a course on malware analysis at SANS Institute. And so I've been working on my toolkit for malware analysis and thinking about practical ways of bringing AI capabilities into a malware analysis toolkit, and that's one of my side projects right now.
Awesome. Well, I will keep an eye out on your website, on your blog, to see what you're up to. And
which is Zeltzer.com.
Zeltzer.com. Thank you so much for joining us, Lenny. This was a lot of fun.
Thank you for having me. It was great.
When it comes to the UK's critical infrastructure, cybersecurity isn't just protecting IT system or data, it's about keeping the lights on. Airbus Protect specializes in OT security, shielding the industrial systems that power our transport, utilities, and government. With UK national security clearances, they provide a sovereign-first approach that most providers can't match. They bridge the gap between complex engineering and modern digital threats. Secure your operations with a partner who understands the high stakes of British industry. Speak to their experts at securityweekly.com/Airbus Protect. That's securityweekly.com/Airbus Protect. Welcome to Enterprise Security Weekly. For this interview, we're chatting with Alexandre Sierra. He is a serial entrepreneur that has worked in many security roles, built many security companies over the years. He's currently co-founder and CTO at Tenure Security, a TPCRM vendor helping to build better relationships between first and third parties. Welcome to the show, Alex.
Thank you very much, Adrian. Long-time listener, first-time caller. This is a thrill for me.
Let's just, it's delightful to have you on. Just full disclosure, we work together. We do another podcast together. I worked for Tenchi for a short time. So let's start with TPCRM. People might be familiar with a TPRM term, but maybe not the C placed in the center there.
Sure. So TPRM, third-party risk management, essentially the fact that no company is an island. Depending on who you are, if you're a large bank, you might have anywhere from 5,000 to maybe 15,000 other companies that you depend upon to operate. So if they have a security breach, that's going to impact you indirectly. And that's actually a very important problem. According to the World Economic Forum stats from a couple of years back, about 40% of all security incidents on large enterprises that have material impact start with a problem at a third party that then indirectly impacts the first party. And TPRM covers legal issues, financial soundness of the company you're working with, sanctions, all sorts of things. TPCRM is just a subset of TPRM that's focused on cybersecurity, so third-party cyber risk management. But that's the idea. Like, it's natural for CISOs to focus on securing their own networks, their own applications, their own infrastructure. But that's not all, because if you have a problem with a third party, it's going to impact you. It's going to stop your critical processes. Your data that you shared with those third parties might leak. So you have to care for them because it's the same risk.
Yeah, often we'll talk about supply chain without specifying that it's cyber supply chain that we're talking about. But yeah, the rest of the world talks about this stuff too. Like if you get a bad shipment of fish and you run a sushi restaurant, that's supply chain risk, right? Like it's not cyber related at all, but it is supply chain risk.
And supply chain security has been hijacked, much like crypto stopped meaning cryptography. It now means cryptocurrencies. Supply chain used to mean like the regular supply chain, but and even relationship between companies and products that are being bought and sold. And now it's almost became synonymous with software supply chain security. So that's why focusing on TPCRM as a term is probably clearer these days, less ambiguous.
And I want to go over the state of third-party cyber risk management at the moment, and I want to get into, before we get into how people are currently doing third-party cyber risk management, I think it's been interesting. I think most people probably noticed at this point how many breaches and how many incidents we see that start with a third party, right? Whether it's a supply chain risk, like a piece of open source software, or somebody that you've outsourced some critical function to, that goes down. Most people could even probably name breaches off the top of their heads, but I don't have any of the stats in front of me, Alexandre. But if you could talk a little bit about, like from insurance companies, like actual claims and stuff like that. We have some pretty good data, I think, right, on how frequent this.
We do. We've had reports from a few cyber insurance companies, depending on which quarter you're looking at and which report. Of course, the causes of incidents vary. But for many years now, third-party risk has been a leading cause of cyber insurance claims. We've seen reports saying there was the leading cause of claims, 41% from resilient in a couple of their reports. We've seen the World Economic Forum stat that about 40% of incidents with material impact start with a third party. And this is a growing problem. If you look at the last year's DBIR, the next one is coming up. By the time you hear this, it's after RSA, it's probably been launched. But last year's DBIR showed that year over year, the percentage of breaches involving third parties went from 15 to 30%. And again, the distinction and the difference between the 30 and the 40% is because the 40% is all incidents, so that includes availability only, whereas the DBIR is talking about data breaches, which involve sensitive data leaking, right? So it's a subset of incidents. But that's like, it's a growing problem, doubling year over year. A significant chance of relevant incidents start at a third party.
Cool. Hotel phone.
I would even say that the largest financial heist in history happened last year. It was the theft of $1.5 billion with a B from the Bybit cryptocurrency exchange by North Koreans, allegedly. And the way they did it was not hacking Bybit itself. It was going through a supplier called SafeWallet. Right. That is a software they were using to manage their cryptocurrency reserves. And they went through and that's important because of the conversation we're going to have later on, they breached the laptop of a senior developer. From there, if I remember correctly, they pivoted into GitHub, and from GitHub into AWS. They changed the code that was being run in production in AWS. So the next time that Bybit did a transaction, the funds went elsewhere, right? And a lot of what's going wrong with TPCRM today is that those disciplines, endpoint security, cloud security, SaaS security, are not being covered at all, by the way, or very poorly by the techniques and the tools that we've been using up to date.
Yeah, and if you really track how software is compiled and built and deployed into production, it's amazing how many scripts we're running. We have no idea how safe these scripts are. Like NPM has like pre-install and post-install scripts that will be run. We receive binary packages from companies that we just we install and deploy. We get patches, that we just blindly install as quickly as possible. And every now and then we see a situation where the patch itself has been compromised. That you get compromised through the trusted update from a software supplier. So it's getting a lot more attention now. I agree, and really, it looks like most of what we're doing to create, to at least pretend like we have some level of trust with a supplier, it's mostly point in time assessments and questionnaires and stuff like that, right?
It is. The gold standard today for third-party risk management in general and third-party cyber risk management in particular is self-assessment questionnaires, maybe followed up with a little bit of evidence review, right? So you're sending hundreds of questions on a questionnaire. Are you deploying 2FA, or describe your vulnerability management process? And this is, by the way, the same thing that cyber insurance underwriting does. It's very similar. It's a good parallel between the two disciplines. And this is like the lowest common denominator, right? It's self-assessment questionnaires are a poor data collection tool. They're amenable to you don't control who's answering the questionnaire. If they know the right answer, or if they want to tell you the right answer, it's a point in time assessment that at best you do once a year, or at least once every contract renewal cycle. So pre-contract and then pre-renewal, essentially. And so it's a poor collection mechanism. There's a lot of human labor involved, both in who's answering the questionnaire and the folks reviewing it. Evidence is easily faked, and it's never been easier to write fake responses that look professional, that look good, and generate fake evidence than now with the advent of generative AI, right? And even if the person at the other end is doing everything right, trying their best to answer truthfully, they might not know the right answer. They might not know their entire estate and their security. It might be the salesperson at the SaaS vendor you're hiring answering that questionnaire, right? And so they're trying to get that deal closed and doing their best. And that doesn't mean they're representing the truth. Plus, companies change every day. They're changing their infrastructure. They're deploying new code. They're hiring and firing people. They're changing processes, especially if you work with more modern, more dynamic companies. Doing that once a year, once every 3 years, depending on the contract term, is just insane. And the parallel I make with people is, so you have a build versus buy option. So let's say you're a huge bank and you want to have a contact center. You could build it in-house, or you could outsource it to a professional contact center company. There are pros and cons to each approach. But if you ran it in-house, you would have real-time security monitoring. You would have very frequent vulnerability checks on everything. You would make sure everything is hardened. You would train all those professionals, for security awareness. Now, all of a sudden, just because I hired another company to do it, I'm okay with just sending a questionnaire once a year. It's the same data. It's the same risk if that environment gets compromised. Why all of a sudden do we believe we can just send a questionnaire once a year? I understand why we're here. And I know third-party cyber risk management people are doing the best they can with limited political support, limited budget, limited teams. So my heart goes out to those people doing that work. But it's insanity. And it's high time we did something different.
If I could just chime in too, as a person who was in a position that received those questionnaires. Small software company providing a service to our customers and stuff like that. I would receive these questionnaires, like you said, hundreds of questions, maybe 50 pages long if I printed it out. Sales guys are like, you got to have, okay, today's Tuesday. We need this Thursday. You're under the gun. It's a small shop, so you don't have all of the things that your much larger customers do. And I would get in trouble because I would answer the question fairly directly. And the wordsmithing that would take place afterwards as everybody else is reviewing it and stuff would suddenly come into play. And I used to make the gallows humor joke of, we protect our systems by burying them in these questionnaires so nobody can find the server again. It was terrible. It's a terrible method for assessing the risk of these, trying to do the best I could, but I'm finishing up, and I'm just like, oh gosh, don't look at us any closer, because we're going to be hosed.
I've also been in that position. I've also had to respond to those, and the SIG lights and all those, and of course everybody's questionnaire is different. But yeah, it's generally a bad sign when the gold standard for a process that you perform is Microsoft Excel, and like the biggest innovation to happen with that gold standard is now AI fills out the spreadsheet instead of you filling out the spreadsheet, but it's still a spreadsheet, right? So now you have to worry about not somebody lying, but hallucination as well. So, I mean, the good news is, the bar is pretty low. There's a lot of room for improvement. And, when the standard is something that you can label as due diligence, just to be able to say, yes, we did our due diligence. And nobody really digs into that. Nobody really says, what are you calling due diligence? Like, we're not even at that level yet where people are challenging due diligence, at least with suppliers like your size, Jason, and with the size that I worked for. But
hey, to be clear, that's from my past, y'all. If you don't look at the current, but that's a different scenario. But yeah, it was.
Yeah, you can also look at my LinkedIn, your imagination.
Yeah, you look at my LinkedIn profile, you'll be able to figure things out really fast. Whatever this probably.
Sorry for sussing out compromising stories in your past, but yeah, like we also answer questionnaires. We try to be as truthful as possible, but like the economic incentive, and most people will try to be truthful, but the economic incentive is in getting the deal done, and getting the deal done means getting the questionnaire answered and approved, right? And to be frank, it's not just questionnaire that people use. I think it's by far the most used tool. We have research on this, but there's a variety of techniques that people use. So for on the more manual, expensive side, they can get a Big Four auditor or even someone from internal audit and send them to do like an on-site assessment and interview people and review evidence. That doesn't scale at all, and it's super expensive. They will only do a tiny majority of supercritical vendors. They might perform a penetration test on a third party.
I've heard that.
And there are they could rely on quote unquote independent audits, such as a SOC 2, which has its own host of problems, and we could spend a half an hour just talking about that. And in fact, we have in the past, Adrian, but we should let's not get too far down that rabbit hole, but has a lot of problems because, again, it's also point in time. And the thing about the independent audits is that they're also under full control of the third party, and thus will suffer from the economic incentives problem again. They want to try their best to make it look as good as possible, not as truthful as possible, because they will use that as a lubricant to close deals more quickly. Because the third parties that refrained, they choose the audit scope, they choose the audit criteria, like which controls they claim to have. They choose who the auditor is. They choose when the audit's going to happen. If they don't like the output, they just throw it away, choose another auditor, maybe that's, has a lower bar. And they do that until they get a clean report. And then they present that to their customers, right? So essentially that's the cycle there. So it's not as independent as it should be, as it was designed to be in paper, right? So it's not a very valuable tool. And then you have the security ratings companies, which I think BitSight created that market maybe 14 years ago, 15 years ago. Security Scorecard closely followed, and then there are many players doing security ratings right now. And we can go a little bit into that because that's also the space we're in. And I give a lot of credits to the people that came before us and created the idea. But there are a lot of space for improvement. And I think part of the reason why we're talking today is because I think there's a market motion right now. Gartner is finally recognizing it. And Gartner is a lagging indicator, typically, in my experience, about the direction that this is going. But I'm going to stop here and let you continue.
Yeah, it's and that's an interesting industry. Like generally, I only hear complaints from security leaders about some of those. Not exclusively. Like some people like the opportunity to do something. Like people enjoy. Okay, give me a list of what I need to do, and watch my letter grade go from an F or a D. Oh no, we're still allowing TLS 1.1 on one of our websites. now we get an A now that we fixed that. Not that that's prevented a breach or anything, but people do kind of like checklists because it's very clear set of actions that you need to do, and you're literally getting rewarded. These grades from these security scorecard companies are public, so everybody gets to see as that grade improves over time. But something I've had a habit of doing is every time I see a breach, I go look up these company scores, and they don't correlate at all to the security of the company or the fact that they've even had a breach. Sometimes it takes 2 to 4 weeks before that scorecard even reflects the fact that they've had a breach, even though it's been covered by the media for the last 2 to 4 weeks. So it's when you look at it like that, when you actually run a sniff test against it, it doesn't pass for me.
And there's a reason why it happens, right? Because let's talk about what's good about what those companies did and what the innovation is that they brought. So they said, we need to walk away from self-reporting and traditional audit. Like, there are things you can only check with traditional audit, like tools, like if you have governance, what size your budget is. Like, there's no automated test for that sort of thing, right? But for most security control testing, there should be a way to automate this, right? And so this is the great thing that those companies brought to the market. Let's do automated testing, right? But the problem is those companies were created in the pre-cloud, pre-AI era, right? So having someone install an agent or a VM doing vulnerability scanning inside the network of a third party is just, beyond the pale. That will never happen. Like the introducing risk like that inside an environment, when you're talking about old on-prem environments, was insane. Right. And so they did the only thing they could is they went after the information that was available. It wasn't necessarily the information that mattered most, but it was the information that existed that they could get,
right,
which is the external attack surface and threat intelligence data, essentially what we call outside-in data. So anything that they can get that's accessible from the internet. So whatever DNS settings you have, whatever services you have exposed to the internet, like your web server, your email infrastructure, whatever we can get just from what you're exposed to the internet, and whatever we're seeing on the dark web and the forums, the threat intel feeds that correlates to that infrastructure, that's what we're going to be basing our tests upon. So good thing, we're going after security tests, security data, right? I love that. Problem is, that's just a tiny sliver of the real picture. It's only seeing a tiny percentage of the actual IT footprint of those companies, and it's only testing a tiny percentage of the actual security controls. And we estimated, we looked at what it's possible to do, because we also do outside-in scanning, your attention, right? And so if you look at, for example, the CIS critical security controls, you can generate automated tests and generate evidence for compliance with, at most, if we're being like super, super lenient, 20% of the requirements on the CIS critical security controls, right? And you're seeing maybe less than 1%, just the stuff that's on the DMZ. And even less than that, because these days you have a lot of things that are internet accessible on the cloud. And those products, since they don't see your cloud inventory, because they're just coming from the outside in without any authenticated scanning or anything, even if they find a public S3 bucket, there's no way to attribute that to a company. If they see a VM with no DNS pointing towards it, with an IP address that's been allocated temporarily, they have no way of attributing that to a particular company, right? So even the external attack surface, because of cloud, they're missing a ton of things that are generating incidents all day, every day, right? So that's the situation we encountered in 2019 when we founded Tenure, and we said, hey, we can do better than this. But we're going to have to change some of the assumptions. So instead of going after the data that was easy to get, we said, how do we get to the data that matters? We have to change the whole business model, because the way those current solutions work is they're selling expediency. They're selling, hey, I have tens of thousands of companies I'm already scanning, because they're scanning the entire internet, essentially, right? They're like Senses or Shogun, right? And they're saying, just tell me who your vendor is. I'm going to tell you what their score is. Boom. Simple, fast. So they're selling speed.
People love scores.
Yeah.
But, and it's also easy to communicate to business, a score. Like, they understand credit ratings, so security ratings, good concept, right? problem is the data sucks. The data is not good. It's not actually representative of that company's security. So what we did instead here at Tenure, and we're the only company that I know about, and believe me, we're looking. We've mapped dozens of competitors, haven't found anyone. We are actually saying, okay, we also do questionnaires. We want them to be as short as possible. We also do outside-in scanning, but we uniquely found a way to make inside-out scanning work. So essentially, for that subset of critical third parties that you're willing to engage with, we built a tool that's specialized in doing authenticated scanning, inside-out scanning on their cloud infrastructure and their security products. So we can get a real, no one's 100% complete, but much more complete view of what their internal infrastructure is like. So essentially, you will say as a big bank to your vendor, you know that audit rights I have on my contract? Instead of sending someone from a big four to audit it, I want you to connect to this audit tool. It's going to do automated continuous audit. It's going to be a lot less work for you. You don't have to receive an auditor. You don't have to fill out questionnaires. You don't have to manually generate evidence. This tool is going to do it for you automatically by connecting to your IDP, to your endpoint security tool, to your IaaS, PaaS, or SaaS cloud infrastructure, and get that evidence automatically, anonymize it, generate security ratings, generate findings, compliance reports, and make that available to your first party on an ongoing basis. The idea is we don't need to have manual work anymore. We automate this as much as possible. With that kind of setup today, we can cover almost 65% of requirements on the CIS critical security controls. So that's 44% of controls you no longer need questionnaire questions for, which everyone loves. First parties, third parties, except maybe the auditors, but audit firms, but everyone loves that idea.
I was going to ask, how are the customers, the third parties, the ones who are, putting their systems into this, how are they taking that? I mean, I could totally see that, yes, I'm happy to get rid of the questionnaire because everybody hates that. But I could see some individuals inside of the companies like, wait, what are we exposing? Like, what information are we sharing?
That is the $1 million question. Thank you for that, Jason. And that's what we get on every sales call, every time we do a demo. That's questions number 1 through 5 that people ask is exactly what you said. So there are 2 main ways in which third parties are concerned about this, right? I want to say the technical and objective side of things, and then the relationship or psychological side of things. Let's start with the technical and objective things. Okay. We've designed this to be non-intrusive. This is less intrusive than a penetration test. Here's why.
Sure.
Because I don't install an agent. I don't have network connectivity to that third party. I'm only having tightly scoped API permissions that the third party themselves are setting up and reviewing before they do, right? That gives me only read-only access, so I can't change anything, disable a control, cause any downtime, delete anything. And that read access is further scoped down to just configurations, just metadata. I don't get access through those permissions to any data processed on those environments. Meaning, even if someone hacks me, there's no way that they're going to hack the third party or leak data stored at that third party through me. So that's like a basic design principle here at the way our product works. So that kind of takes a lot of pressure off. And we have a lot of other things that we implemented in the product that even the metadata we don't show to the first party. So even though we could have a list of all the users you have on Entra ID, we don't give that list to your first party. Like if we find, let's say Adrian Sanabria doesn't have 2FA enabled because he's an administrator of an AWS account 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Just give one example. When Adrian logs in, or someone from his company, which is the third party, they see the full detail. They know the account ID. They know the user ID because they have to go and fix it. But when a customer of Adrian's logs in, they see, hey, this company has 3 AWS users without 2FA, but they don't know the account IDs, they don't know the user IDs, they don't know IP addresses. They don't see the detail. They see the nature of the problems, they see the severity of the problem, they see how long companies are taking to fix them, but they don't get even the metadata, right? So those kinds of controls we implemented in our product, the design of the product, take care of the objective thing, like this is introducing risk. This is going to allow company A to see company B's data because this is a multi-tenant environment. And we eat our own dog food, by the way. Every company in our platform can monitor our production environment. So we tell third parties, the same way your customer is monitoring you, you can monitor me. Right? So we eat our own dog food around here. That's the first kind of objection. The second kind of objection is more related to relationships, which means, look, TPCRM and TPRM in general is about power dynamics. If you're a tiny startup, right, and you send AWS a custom 300 question questionnaire, the response is going to be go pound sand. Like, you either accept the documentation I have prepared for you or you don't. Like, I'm not, because you're much smaller, you're not a representative customer.
Right. They'll have
Sorry?
a trust center or something like that. They send you a link to their trust.
Precisely, right? And also, if a first party sends someone a 300 question questionnaire, it says, by the way, that's optional. If you don't answer that questionnaire, we're going to do business anyway. What percentage of third parties would answer the questionnaire? 0. So at the end of the day, there are two things that need to happen here. The most important one, the first party needs to have a program in place where they're tiering their third parties based on criticality and saying, hey, if you meet those conditions, you need to enable inside outstanding, or else we're going to have to not renew with you, talk to your competitors, or decide what to do, or have an exception. Someone has to accept the risk, right? So it becomes a requirement. The second thing is, this is a net benefit to the third party as well. Besides the point of reducing the load of assurance, which means fewer questions on the questionnaire that you brought up, Jason, especially if you're a medium-sized company or you're below the cybersecurity poverty line, your first party is saying us, thank you, to give you third party a lightweight CTEM, CSPM, and SSPM solution for free, which you might not have had before, or that you now don't need to spend that budget on necessarily, right? Am I competing against CSPM? I am not. But for a lot of companies, this is the only security tool they will have that is doing vulnerability scanning on them, right? And we will support them. We will have a customer success team made up of cybersecurity professionals that will help them onboard, that will help them interpret, prioritize, and design solutions for the issues that are being found. Because at the end of the day, the greatest value add that we show to first parties is showing that their third parties are fixing the problems. So risk, not only risk visibility, which we have in spades, but risk reduction, right? So when you combine all that, at the end of the day, the joke I usually do, Jason, is, did you ever see someone enjoy being audited? Because our NPS score is 82 with third parties. That's double, more than double the average for SaaS B2B enterprise product, which is 31. And the reason why is because what they say, they come on stage at our events and they say, this is the first time someone came to help me improve my security rather than audit me, right? Because we're working with them, giving them the tools, telling them about the alerts, allocating security professionals not to fix stuff for them because we can't touch their environments, but to guide them. And it makes a huge difference. This is not theoretical. We have over 15 banks we're working with, operating on over 20 countries. There's subsidiaries, vendors they have on those countries. So this is working.
Nice.
Yeah, does that answer your question, Jason? Because that's the important question.
Yeah, I mean, well, I found it interesting. I mean, because I'm kicking it around, and it's like, it would be really, thinking back to the past job where I was definitely in kind of that poverty level, like I begged for a Nessus license, which they weren't expensive back then. You know, it would be extremely helpful. And it would help me get things done because the third party is pushing this, right? Or the first party, I guess. I'm the third party. They're pushing this. The part I wondered about. Yeah. Oh, yeah. The part I wondered about a little bit was, you know, like the folks inside the organization who are going to be afraid of looking bad, because when you install something like this, all the skeletons come piling out of the closet and they're like, oh my gosh, I was telling the execs we're fine, and now we're measurably, we can show where the problem is. On the plus side, to Adrian's point, we like to fix things. It's really easy to just punch through this and start, well, hopefully it's easy to start punching through this and making improvements.
If we're going to trust each other, though, right? And you don't want the skeletons to come out of the closet. That's also a risk signal, right? Like if you refuse to use a tool like this,
Yes.
is it because you're hiding something, or like?
I got a couple of stories I will not share here.
We can have a beer RSA and talk about this, but 98+% of the third parties our first parties talk to end up, not immediately because they need to understand it first, end up agreeing to this. The 2%, when you look back, sometimes they say, yeah, we dodged the bullet with that one, right? That's more often than not the case. But yeah, like being afraid of how the first party is going to react when they see how actually secure you are, because come on, no organization has patched all their vulnerabilities. It's actually impossible, right? Adrian knows, I think, better than most. Like there's studies from the CISO Institute proving this as well. So it's about setting expectations. And the other thing we do is work with the first party to say, hey, we need to go easy on the third parties, right? You can't expect perfection. You want to ask them for improvements, not perfection. And one of the things we do, to give one example, is we align with the first parties to give third parties a grace period. So you're going to be using the product for 30 or 60 days, get to fix a ton of stuff, and only then give the first party the visibility. So you're not going to be surprised on day one. You don't even know what they're going to see. They're seeing at the same time. No, let's give you some time for comfort here that you can. And then you know what happens during those 60 days? They're fixing stuff like crazy.
Yeah.
And the first parties are just super happy about it because that's what the first parties want. They don't want to create problems with the business units that want to hire that vendor. They want the vendor to be more secure. That's why TPRM exists. So giving them that and the incentive, like they sometimes know about a problem for the first time because they didn't have a tool like this. They're being helped solve it. Like the tool gives them exactly what to fix, not only the list of problems, but step-by-step instructions on how to fix it for each one. And our customer success team helps them make decisions and hold their hands. And they have the driver because the customer's seeing it. The first party sees it. So you can't get someone else to say, we need to prioritize something else. Let's sweep this under the rug. No one will know about it. That's not true anymore. So you combine those three things, like sunlight is the best disinfectant, people fix things. On average, on the first 4 to 8 weeks that a third party starts using our product, they fix on average 80% of critical and high security findings. And again, I'm talking 3 times as much visibility as with my competitors. So we're talking about lack of 2FA, public S3 buckets, databases exposed to the internet on the cloud, lack of at-rest encryption, lack of logging, all sorts of things that we're seeing create breaches all day, every day are getting fixed en masse because those 3 things finally lined up.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think you're saying you haven't found anybody else really doing this. And I think once the dam breaks, once a few companies, because you're doing it at scale in Brazil, I think in the US, once that dam breaks, you're going to have a lot of competitors. There's going to be a lot of people raising money to this kind of thing.
I have an update on this. We're recording this prior to RSA. So last week, we sponsored the FSI's Extreme Summit. And I can't say names, of course, but we talked to some of the largest financial institutions in the US, and we have trials with a lot of them already. Like they were super interested. And we learned there was a panel about, again, people from very large financial institutions discussing the problem of TPCRM. Half of the panel was about how do we get inside our data. Outside-in data and questionnaires are just not cutting it. We want to kill the traditional assessment. And so when people learned there that there was a tool that already did this, like they went ballistic. So I think the timing is right. And I agree with you, Adrian. Having either new companies or our competitors catch up to what we're doing would be the best sort of market validation. There's an advantage in being alone, but there are also disadvantages, right? So having the market validation will certainly help, but we're already expanding into the rest of Latin America. We started out in Brazil until we have found product market fit and we could refine the product. It's been around for 5 years now. It's an enterprise grade product essentially at this point. But we're now expanding internationally, right? And we couldn't be happier with the reception we had in the US market, and we want to go into Europe as well.
Nice. All right. Alexandre, thank you so much for joining me today for this conversation. I've been waiting to have this conversation for a while, and I'm glad we got to get into it because it's almost every day I see something in the news that makes me think about this approach.
Yeah, that's true. Thank you very much for having me. It was a genuine pleasure.
A big thanks to everyone watching or listening to this week's episode. I hope you enjoyed these 3 interviews. Next week, post RSAC, we'll be moving to a new format for the next 2 months. We'll have one new interview each week, but then we will rebroadcast the executive interviews that we recorded at the RSAC conference for the rest of each of these episodes. So that will cover most of April and May, and then in June, we'll get back to the norm. See you then. Bye-bye.